an internal barrier that comes from old happy is like, oh, why bother helping when I'm not going to be able to make a really big difference for people?
Mm.
And that to me speaks so much to our obsession with perfection, which is a huge, huge forcing mechanism of old happy. And it's like, if I can't save the world, then my contribution is pathetic, basically. And I know
Mm.
this because I used to think that. I used to think, well, I want to help, but anything I do is going to be too small and inconsequential. So why bother? And that mindset kept me from not only helping people, but also experiencing my own happiness.
Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Evergreen RX. I'm your host, Hayden, licensed mental health therapist, Cancer Moon, and the first to get deep at any party. And I am so thrilled about today's guest. We have Stephanie Harrison on the pod today. Stephanie is an international best-selling author, and she is an expert in the science of happiness. She's a writer, designer, and speaker devoted to the study of well being, and in my opinion, to being a shining example of the practice what you preach saying. She has her book, New Happy Getting Happiness Right in a World That's Got It Wrong, which is an international bestseller that kicked off a movement to redefine happiness. It is truly inspirational and life changing to read this book. And as the founder of the New Happy, she's really revolutionized the way people understand and pursue happiness. And a lot of you guys listening might recognize her work from Instagram. She creates amazing graphics that break down inspiration on self worth and productivity, dealing with our emotions, being present, and she breaks them down into these bite-sized aesthetic graphics that are so amazing. So I am over the moon to have Stephanie on the podcast today.
I'm over the moon to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So today we're really going to discuss the new happy paradigm. I mean, this is where Stephanie's work just shines. And I really want to understand what that paradigm looks like, but also talk about how we can understand and redefine self interest and self care through a more supportive and collective lens, and how we can identify our own gifts so that we can give them to others, which in turn gives to us and fuels our own happiness. And to kind of talk about how we make our own happiness underneath this capitalistic structure, a structure that is not always in line with the ideas of the new happy paradigm. So that's kind of where we're going with today's convo.
Sounds amazing.
Okay. Yeah. So couldn't have somebody better to talk about it with. So, in brief, if you want to just start by giving the listeners a little bit of an idea of what the new happy paradigm is. Obviously, there's enough to fill a whole book on it, but just kind of the core tenets and what makes it so vital at this time in history.
Yeah. So basically, I argue that we have been conditioned into a pursuit of happiness that's making us actively miserable. And that conditioning comes from individualism, capitalism, and domination, these forces that have told us who we are, what we should do with our lives, how we're related to other people. And I call this old happy. And old happy is, I argue, the source of our individual, but also collective misery. And until we break free of it and adopt this new paradigm, I don't think we'll ever be able to experience the happiness that we're looking for. So instead, what I advocate for is a different form of happiness that's backed by not only hundreds of studies, but also tons and tons of, like ancient wisdom and insights from across all sorts of fields, including the arts and the humanities, about how to live a good life. And basically, that boils down to two things. In order to be happy, you need to be who you are and then use who you are to help other people. And so it's this intertwined pursuit of happiness that supports both you and our community as a whole. And so that's also my proposal for how we can create individual and collective happiness at the same time.
Mm, so amazing. I mean, what a nutshell. You clearly
I've
have
had a
this
lot of
down.
practice.
Yeah, yeah.
It took me a
Yeah.
really long time to do that though. Like I spent I think I spent about 7 years just trying to figure out how exactly to define old happy and back it up with research, and then to be able to articulate it like that took me about another 3 years. So all things take time.
Yeah, I think what's so fascinating about your work and what makes so much sense with redefining this happiness paradigm is the collective nature to it, because
Mm,
I think a lot of us inherently understand that as we've gotten more individualistic and we've moved away from community, that we're less happy, and that was very evident in, the pandemic and
mm,
through other, like, life transition experiences that people have gone through, where it takes you out of the community that you've been in, whether it's a big move or leaving a
mm,
school or whatever. And I just feel like that's such a vital part of what you talk about, and I think that that's kind of why I'm so interested in the idea of, like, how we
mm,
really start to shift our framework to giving of ourself to others, being in connection with others in that way, because things are so busy and the structure that we live in doesn't really, like, support that or necessarily want that.
mm,
And so sometimes it can feel very hard
mm.
to break through all of this old conditioning that kind of that is the exact opposite of what you're saying.
It's really tricky, and I just want to acknowledge that. I'm so curious to hear your thoughts on this too, given your expertise and what you do. But something I think that's really interesting, and you touched upon this when you brought up self-interest, is that one of the ways that old happy keeps us stuck is by convincing us that our self-interest is fulfilled by focusing exclusively on ourselves.
Mm,
And that becomes a very, very dangerous cycle that when I look around, I see so many people getting stuck in. And more broadly, I think it's even more evident on a cultural level too when we look at, like who we hold up as leaders, who is in charge of politics or of big institutions, of who is valorized in our media.
mhm,
And if you start to look at it through this like old happy filter, is what I call it, you start to see that the only people who are really elevated and celebrated are people who have pursued excessive self interest in the form of aggrandizing and kind of like building themselves up as individuals rather than what they've done for communities or for other people or for the
mhm,
planet. And the problem with this is that yes, there are things that we all need to do that are exclusively like for ourselves, right? Like, of course, we all need to, for example, brush our teeth every day in order to protect our oral health. Like, that's an important thing that you can't substitute elsewhere. But
mhm.
all of us also can only fulfill certain parts of our self interest by being there for other people and by showing up for our communities. And so what happens is that in a culture where you're told that your self-interest comes from focusing exclusively on yourself, you pursue that, it doesn't work, you blame yourself, you feel more inadequate about yourself. You then think, "Okay, I have to push even harder and focus more and more on myself." And then you get caught in this cycle of thinking that there's something wrong with you and you just need to push a little bit harder and a little bit more, and then that ends up fueling more individualism, more capitalism, more domination. And so, what I really wanted to do with my work was help to expand this understanding of our self interest and recognize that in many ways, the very most important thing you can do for yourself is to be there for other people. And
Mm,
this is why I have a lot of issues with like kind of phrases like, oh, you have to put yourself first and all of that kind of stuff because they make it seem like it's a trade off, like you can't satisfy both at the same time, which we know is very much possible from all of the research that's been done.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think something that I have been thinking about more in my own life and practice is, you know, in the therapy world, there is a lot of there's a large emphasis on you and the individual, and you're in individual therapy, and the therapist doesn't even really bring much of themselves, if any at all, to that relationship, even though it is a relationship. And yes, there's ethics and there's boundaries, and we understand that, but there can be this focus that gets perpetuated of, like, thinking about myself, talking about myself, healing myself, doing all this inner work. You have to do it
Mhm.
alone, and it's you go on retreats or whatever, like,
Yeah.
and that does get really, really isolating in some ways, and it also can get really draining
Mm.
and old.
Mhm.
And I think I've been playing around with the idea more of how healing and just even, like, living and enjoying, which is such a big part of healing and being alive, is like found so much in those moments of play, being
Mm.
with others, trying something new, which tends to be when we're with others or in some kind of strange new environment.
Yeah.
And I think that when you start turning away from that kind of internal, like reflective self, because there can be like the ego kind of
Mhm.
e self, and then there can also just be this real um, you're really absorbed with this reflective
Mm.
self relationship. I think when you start to incorporate other things, at least I found that the things that I learn
Mm.
or the solutions that I come to or the stuff that gets worked out that I've maybe been trying to work out all on my own, that I've been approaching in this very individualistic way, it
Yeah.
just naturally comes forth.
So wise. Wow. That's really profound. I think that's been my experience as well. Like there it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I love therapy. I love my own therapist. I love
Mhm,
all of the therapists who I've met. And yet, in many ways, the fact that therapy is offered as like the only solution for mental health care in this country is very epitomizes old happy in a lot of ways, to your
mhm,
point, because it's this very individualistic solution. And the furthest that we go is like family or group therapy for
mhm,
bringing other people involved. And as you said, there's all of these other techniques, many of them, with roots in other religions, indigenous practices, in recognition of our interconnectedness and spirituality that offer us these approaches that might be also supportive, but that aren't offered in the same way or
mhm,
recognized as viable as individual one-on-one therapy. And I think that's really interesting and sort of speaks to, again, like, unfortunately, this idea that you're broken is everywhere in old happy culture. Is so pervasive. It is the like kind of like the foundational belief in old happy that you're broken and there's something wrong with you. And even sometimes I wonder, I'm like, does going to therapy ever reinforce that belief for
mhm.
people, and like make them feel that way? But I'm super curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that's a really good question. I think that it can. I really do. I think I've experienced that in my own personal therapy journey as well, and I agree with you. I absolutely love therapists that I've worked with for so long, and um and it's not her, it's not, no one is like telling me, but there is this um just larger tone in the way that we talk about mental health and self-care and those things going hand in hand that um can start to get in your head. It makes its little way in of like, well, I need to work on this. I need to work on that. Oh my God, my attachment style, this, that, whatever. Like I can't get through my morning routine without having
Mm,
something I've bumped up against that you know, well, that's probably because my generational trauma, that's, whatever it is. Like we have all these words, and I do think sometimes inadvertently and usually out of a place that's really well
yeah.
intended, it does kind of push that narrative forward that something is wrong
Mm,
or that we have to be doing this work at all times to
yeah.
just get by. And it's like there's really no end date, there's no finish line for that. And that's where I think this idea of contribution that you
Mm,
talk about is I'm so fascinated by it, because I just think I have in my own life run into barriers with trying to incorporate more things kind of in my mental health, my
mm,
wellness, just life practice, things like contributing, whether this looks like volunteering or just
yeah.
being there for my friends more at the drop of a hat or helping someone move or
Mhm.
whatever it is. And I've run into barriers with that because I feel like, oh my God, is there enough time? Or I want to give back, but where do I even start? Where do I
Mhm.
look? Like it can be very overwhelming.
Yeah.
And my guess is a good amount of that probably has to do with the fact that the old happy narrative is
Mhm.
really at work, but I'm very interested to know how you think we address these barriers.
Yeah, it's so interesting too. I think you nailed it so well. Like one thing we have to recognize is like if we're trying to dismantle old happy, which is ultimately my goal, is that, you know, it's not going to just like roll over and let us do that. Like these are highly entrenched and powerful systems that have very large incentives in place where it wants us to behave in a certain way. And that means we're going to run into resistance as we try and address it. And that resistance might be internal in ourselves, it might be in the world. So, like, I think all the time about how, like an internal barrier that comes from old happy is like, oh, why bother helping when I'm not going to be able to make a really big difference for people?
Mm,
And that to me speaks so much to our obsession with perfection, which is a huge, huge forcing mechanism of old happy. And it's like, if I can't save the world, then my contribution is pathetic, basically. And I know
mm,
this because I used to think that. I used to think, well, I want to help, but anything I do is going to be too small and inconsequential. So why bother? And that mindset kept me from not only helping people, but also experiencing my own happiness. And as
mhm,
soon as I sort of got over myself and thought, okay, well, the way that I always reframe it for people is thinking about a time that somebody helped you and they didn't have to do it. They just showed up. They said they saw you were suffering, they saw you needed something, and they came to you and they made a difference for you. And you can probably bring to mind a couple of those moments that are really salient, right? That have stayed with you, of these moments of care and love and contribution. And
mhm,
then imagine that they had stayed home because they thought, oh, it's not going to matter. And thinking about that always reminds me that, like, the way that we heal our broken world is not because of one person showing up and doing all of the work and
mm,
leading some sort of like revolution and driving this change and being a kind of like a figurehead or doing any of that. It's not by like one superhero, one Avenger showing up and like magically saving the entire population. It's through all of us coming together and doing our little part in our circles, in our communities, in our workplaces, and trying our very best to uproot and eradicate old happy there, to show up and love the people who are around us. And that is the only way we will be able to make our world better. And so if people tap out because their role isn't big enough, then we'll
yeah.
never be able to achieve that big goal.
Yeah, oh my gosh, that's so beautifully said, and you know what's so funny? The first thing that popped into my head when you were talking about this is it's just very top of mind, like, yesterday, I, did some shopping with my mom,
Mm,
and I was trying things on, and she was, like, out kind of in the main area, and I, like, peeked around the little curtain because I needed help. The
mhm,
zipper was stuck, and I was, like, trying to get out of the clothes, and I was peeking my head and I couldn't find her and I did it again. And this one guy was there and he was just kind of like, I guess he had paid attention that I was with her and he got her attention and he brought her over. And it was such a small thing where it's like, this guy does not have to do that in this Zara right now. Like,
mhm,
I don't need, but it was just a moment of like, really nice humanity and like
mhm.
just kind of he just had his eyes open and he was looking around and he probably saw the look on my face that looked like, "Oh my god, I need help." And it was so sweet, and that's, you know, such a small moment, arguably, but, like, it it isn't really when
It's
what
not.
you're saying, like, it adds up, it's not and it's even just the impact of, like for me, what is the cascading effect of, like it was so heartwarming for this guy to notice and to do that, he didn't have to, and it really made me feel good, and my mom felt really, like, happy to be like, "That's so sweet,"
Yeah,
and the cascading effect of that is huge, and I guess that's what you're saying is,
it
like,
is, yeah.
it's just those little moments of kind of having our eyes open for others and just the little things that we feel that we're capable of doing in that moment.
Exactly. I have goosebumps listening to you tell that story because, like, do you think that that guy would ever imagine that you'd be coming on your podcast the next day to tell that story? Like,
Yeah.
you know, that that's the thing. Like, that's what we're supposed to do for each other. We're
Mhm.
supposed to look for the needs that we see and we're supposed to notice them and do something about them.
Mm,
And in doing so, we get what we're looking for, right? Like, I feel elevated hearing that story because I think, okay, like, there's somebody good out there. There's somebody still doing what they can to make the world better. And that's going to inspire me to open my eyes a little bit wider today and try and do the same for people. And I won't be able to save the world with that today, but I will be
Mm,
able to save one person's world. I will be able to make a small difference in their day, and who knows what's possible from that. And like again, it ties back to individualism, this whole idea that there's like a hero coming to save us, but
mhm,
like we are the heroes. We are the ones who have to show up, and that means carving out this attention and energy to look around to where we can help with the knowledge that that help is actually what ensures our own well-being. And the best thing about this, the thing that like makes me so over the top excited is it didn't have to be this way. Like we could have had to help and never gotten any benefits, but we
mhm,
do get the benefits. We actually
mhm.
have the most amazing situation in the world where we're rewarded for caring for other people. And how lucky is that? Like it's a miracle. And I think it's really like the only thing that will save us at this point.
Yeah, oh my gosh, yes. It's so I mean, when we had spoken about your book informally, however many months ago, and I had told you that, like, your work is so deeply optimistic, that is exactly what it feels like talking to you too about this. It's like, "Oh my gosh," like, just even hearing you say, like, because I mean, I do. I spend a lot of time thinking about
I know you do.
I spend a
You're
I
a
spend a
great
lot of
person.
Thank you. I spend a lot of time thinking about, like, how to just even in my own life
Yeah.
contribute, and I'm like, I get myself overwhelmed with that
Mhm.
idea,
Yeah.
and the thing that you're laying out of, like, it's the small moments, we don't have to have some hero, we don't have to be the hero that swoops down and, like, changes everything.
Yeah.
It's so freeing, and it
Yeah.
really is like, "Oh, wow, I feel much more motivated. I feel much more energized to go out and do what I can," because
Yeah.
now it feels like that is enough, because that's
Yeah.
what you're I think that's what you're saying, is that this old happy idea, it really fools us into thinking the things that we are doing, that we feel capable of, aren't enough,
Yeah.
so then we just don't even feel motivated to do those things,
Yeah.
because why even try?
Why
Why get
bother?
started? Why bother?
Yeah.
Exactly, and,
Yeah.
like, how freeing it is to be like, "Oh my gosh, just one little moment, a smile, a kind thought," anything like that is kind of building this new culture around the idea of happiness, and then we get to reap the rewards of it,
Yeah,
which is so
exactly.
cool.
It's so beautifully said. And like it reminded like listening to you talk, it made me think about how I think like so much of this is also about untangling old happy's obsession with results, right? Which is like measurable results of a capitalist system. So like, if you're running a company or a business, it's like you're measured on your revenue and your sales and you have to hit the stock targets and all this kind of stuff, right? You're always trying to optimize towards a goal, and that goal always has to be ever increasing, right? Like the stock market punishes companies if they bring in the same amount of money this quarter as they did last quarter because that's no longer sufficient. So there's always these ever escalating expectations. And I think like what we have to do is untangle this idea that like we're giving to get a certain result out
Mm,
of somebody. And I think that it can be really easy to get wrapped up in like, okay, I'm going to help this person because I want this result to happen from it. But
mhm,
the best form of help to me is about being result agnostic and saying, like, I'm helping you simply because I'm a person who values this, who knows it
mm,
benefits me, and I want to be a part of a world where we're building a kinder, more loving society. And therefore, I help. And what you do with that help, or how you respond to it, or how it unfolds for you, isn't really my business. And it makes me
mhm,
think about your job as a therapist because I'm like, I would imagine in session, like you show up and you don't always know what exactly is going to help your client, right? Or like
100%.
the comment that you say today, how they might reference that in 6 months and be like, that
Mhm.
changed my life. And you had no idea. But
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
but you were showing up and being who you are and trying to help through your expression of yourself. And then the outcome, it didn't really matter as much. It wasn't something you were holding so tightly or so dependent on, or justifying your self-worth on. And that's where giving becomes problematic because like there's a lot of people who like martyr themselves or,
Mhm.
like give to a point of harming themselves because they're trying to control people. And that's not what we want to do. We want it to be
Mhm.
this like genuine expression of who we are and of our inner goodness.
Oh my gosh. You've really thought of it all, right? You've been doing this research
No,
long enough.
I just spent so much time talking about it and
Yes.
thinking about it.
Yeah, because this is the other, like, really central part of this work, right? Is, like, the idea of our own personal gifts
Yeah.
and bringing forward who we uniquely are in this world and who we are meant to be. And how do you think people can start to identify those gifts if they haven't already? And kind of if you can speak a little bit too of, like, what happens inside of us when
Mhm.
we are able to align our actions with those gifts more.
Mhm. So I argue that every one of us has these three different types of gifts. There's your humanity, which is who you are as a person. There's your wisdom, which is what you have learned, whether that's through your unique lived experience or through study or through, like gathering information from other people. And then there are your talents, which are what you can do. And so, first, figuring out what those gifts are, the very best approach that I highly recommend that can be a little bit vulnerable, but if you can do it, it's so powerful, is to reach out to like five people in your life and ask them to share what they think your gifts are. And the
Mhm,
reason that I recommend doing this is because, again, it breaks the individualistic bubble of thinking like you
mhm,
have to do this all by yourself. Two, most of us, having been conditioned and brought up in old happy culture, have this very skewed self image of ourselves. So we think of ourselves as like horrible, basically. And other people who love us do not see us in this way.
mhm,
And we can learn to see ourselves with those eyes if we borrow them in this capacity. And third, you might notice like really interesting patterns or things that you think are a gift, but that other people don't notice. And usually that means it's latent within you and needs to be cultivated and expressed. And
mhm,
so, as an example, like let's say that you think you'd be like a great public speaker, but you've never actually done that. You've never gone through the process of like learning to put yourself out there and doing it. If somebody doesn't notice that in you, that doesn't mean you don't have that gift. It means that it's something to start practicing and sharing with the world and start getting feedback on.
mhm,
And so once you can identify those different types of gifts, you can start to integrate them into your daily life. And so what that looks like is, for me, it's like, how do you craft a life around your gifts? So, like for you, I, having spent a little bit of time with you, I can easily pick out some of your amazing gifts that would serve you so well in your role as a therapist, and I can see how effective they would be. And then I can also think about some of your gifts that make you a great friend and such a great community member in person,
mm,
and how you might be able to leverage those or build upon them or create space and pockets in your life for those. And what
mhm,
happens is the more that you do that, the more joy you get to experience, the more resilience you tap into, and the more you create that for other people. Because that's the thing about a gift. Like, it doesn't just benefit you, it also is used outwardly to help other people. And so,
mm,
the more that we can craft a life around this, the more that our um, we're able to sort of navigate a lot of challenges that come up inevitably in life and do it with a sense of, purpose and fulfillment and meaning, even if life isn't necessarily going the way that we want it to in those times. And then when
mhm,
life is going well, you get to tap into this like, huge source of joy and potential. But overall, it's something that puts your happiness in many ways central into your life, integrated into your activities and your way of being. And it's not an outcome anymore. It's not something you're chasing. It's something that you're embodying on a daily basis.
oh my god, you make me so giddy when I hear you talk because it's like, oh, it's, like, so like, what it is a gift for us to be able to show up as we are in the world, and I know from my own experience, I mean, my job is very deeply aligned for me
Mm,
as a person, and it is wonderful for me to get to do that as my work, and even on the hard days, it still is wonderful, and it's kind of what you're saying is, like, I'm not giving myself in that way because it looks selfless or because
mhm.
it's, some I'm a martyr and I, am burning myself out. It's like,
Yes.
no, I'm actually finding the joy in my job. Obviously, sometimes when people say something really changed for them or I see it, it's wonderful, but really what I'm getting is the embodiment of
Yeah.
living in within those gifts and using them and exercising them.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just think it's so something that you talk about in the book too, and I think it's very evident if a lot of us look around. Everybody we know has different gifts, their own
Yeah.
set, and that is that uniqueness that a lot of us are seeking,
Mm.
of wanting to feel like we're here for a reason and that we
Yeah.
matter.
Exactly, exactly, and that's the thing, it's like, there are often circumstances that get in the way of us discovering our gifts or finding ways to use them or putting them into practice in exactly the way that we want. But that doesn't mean that it's not possible to start and to start moving towards those. And what I
Mhm,
always want people to think about is like, in the ideal world, in a new happy world, everybody would be in positions where they use their gifts to help in the way that they uniquely are positioned to do in the
mhm,
way that you're describing. And everyone's needs would be satisfied because we all have these unique gifts and we would all be able to contribute something important to our collective community.
mhm,
We force people into paths that do not suit them because of old happy conditioning that says, oh, you have to be a lawyer or a doctor or a business person or a teacher or whatever it is that you were told you have to be in order to be acceptable. But
mm,
the truth is that whatever calls to you, however you can integrate it into your life, whether it is through your work, in your community, as a hobby, as a passion project of yours, that is what will help you to experience that happiness and to meet needs that are
mhm,
going unfulfilled at the same time. So, not only is this, again, benefiting your self interest, but there's also a moral imperative here where I always talk to people who are like, oh, I really want to start sharing on social media, or I want to start my own business, or like kind of take these big leaps. And I always say to them, don't, it's too scary to do it for yourself.
mm,
You have to leverage the power of community to tap into your courage, because if you instead think, I am depriving people of the chance to have a need fulfilled by silencing myself or hiding myself away, it becomes a lot easier to be brave versus
yeah.
the feeling of, oh, I have to put myself out there and I have to be smart and I have to look a certain way and do all this stuff. Like, that's going to keep you stuck forever, isn't it?
Yeah, because even that, it's like that's so like I, me, my, like
Yes.
it feels lonely or just yeah, very scary versus
Yeah.
like, I there's others out there. Like this is for us. This is for like the collective and it is my, one of my purpose, if not the purpose for me in my life is
Yeah.
to bring my gifts forward. And that's true for all of us. And I do really want to comment on when you said that there can be like the latent gifts too,
Mm.
the ones that are going kind of unexpressed. I think that's so powerful because, yeah, if you ask like people in your life and maybe the gifts that you thought they were going to say, some of them are missing. I think that there could be a tendency to go like, "Oh, I guess I don't know," or, I'm not kind of who I thought I was, and it's like, "No, maybe it's just there's some reason why that hasn't come out. Maybe it
Yeah.
wasn't valued when you were younger because of this old happy idea,
Totally.
and something was shoved down or pushed away or shamed or whatever."
Yeah.
And it's like, "No, that doesn't make your gift, like, it any less than the ones that people already see." It's so important to bring that forward too in any way that you can. And I think that that's powerful because I'm sure a lot of people have some wounds around some of their really beautiful gifts because of the
Yeah.
things that we value in our culture and the things that we don't.
It's so true, and, like, I would even, like, just building on what you said, I would also say, like, if there are things that you were shamed for when you were younger or qualities that were, deemed as, like, weird or uncool, you should look at that as a source of
Mm,
your gifts.
mhm, mhm.
Because anything that breaks you away from, like, the kind of established old happy norm often does get treated in a really harmful way, and so, of course, then we, like, isolate ourselves from it and try and disown it. But the I find that people, if you give people enough space to figure it out or to even just listen to themselves, a lot of people know who they are. Like,
Mhm,
they know deep down. Like, I always wanted to be an artist, for example. And it was something that was so weird and impractical. And so I never ever considered it as a career path. And yet, this desire to make art was always within me. And it wasn't until I was going through like profound challenges in my own personal life and like literally struggling so much, and I had to figure out something to do with my emotions, that I started to channel them through artwork. And it was
Mm,
only because of that precipitating event that I found the courage to tap into that latent gift within me and to start to do something with it. And now my job is in many ways being an artist, which I never in a million years would have imagined. And what a weird circuitous path that that ever even happened. But if you have a sense of inner knowing within you, like I'm meant to do X, Y, and Z, it's now your responsibility to start trying to do something with it. And it
mm.
doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be, you have to quit your job and change your life. In fact, I would advise against that. I would advise that you think, okay, if I have 1 hour this week, what can I do to help me to tap into this? And you're not allowed to do more than an hour. And then do it again next week. And then keep trying and see what happens, because that is how real transformation begins, is with those little baby steps that don't seem like they're ever going to mean anything, that ultimately add up into being everything.
100%. Yeah. And I think you're really, reflecting something that a lot of people probably can connect to is that sometimes these gifts, they appear out of these challenges and these times of transformation. And what you're proposing is we don't have to kind of wait for those super hard moments. Those gifts are actually the things that can really help us through those hard moments, and we can utilize them in the good and the bad times in life. And yeah, I think that's why people find, those real part of the reason why people find challenges and hardship in their life really transformative
Yeah,
is it kind of shakes up the like snow globe enough, and
so
it
true.
just throws things up in the air, and they're able to land and like reorder in a new way, and maybe some of those things that were off limits before
Yeah.
because of old happy or whatever experiences, they've now come back to the surface out of necessity.
So beautifully said. I couldn't agree more.
I'm curious how you think that we can kind of balance, well, now saying this question, I'm like, they're not mutually exclusive, but like thinking about maybe the listener that's like, well, how do I balance my personal
Mm.
needs and things like that with contributing to the well-being of others,
Mhm.
being in community, taking the time to do that? Like, how can I find that balance, and how can I notice when I'm falling back
Yeah.
into old happy thoughts?
I think that you know, I think the funny thing about a lot of our self-help, wellness, mental health content world is that it advocates like removing things from your life and eliminating stuff. And that can be a good approach. But I tend to veer more on the side of trying to add things
Hmm.
that bring you meaning and fulfillment. And so I think that a lot of our a lot of people that I hear from feel like their lives are very full but very empty at the same time.
Mhm.
So they're busy, they're running around, they have all this stuff on their plate, but it feels meaningless. It feels pointless. It feels like, when is life going to change? When is my real life going to start? When are things going to finally click into place for me? And I think that if that describes you, what I would recommend is thinking about how you can add a source of meaning to that. And before you yell at me and say, like, I'm too busy or whatever, it doesn't, again, this isn't like you don't have to overhaul your whole life. This is, I'm talking like an hour or two a week, which I think most of us can usually carve out in some way. And just thinking about, like, how can I use this time to do something that helps me to, like tap into my gifts and share them in some way. And it, again, you don't have to try and change the world. Just try and show up for your neighbors or for your community in some way. Be the friend who calls to check in when something is going really hard in your life. Be the
Mm,
person who drops off a meal for somebody in your neighborhood who's going through something tough. Start making things, start sharing who you are with people. Anything that you can do that just gives you a chance to practice those things. And what people tell me is that like 1 hour becomes more meaningful than almost everything else that they're doing. And from there, you can start to expand it outward. And I also think that another approach to consider is like, look, I'll tell you a quick story. So I used to, when I first started to like meditate when I was in my teens, I used to think like, oh, my meditation practice is what I do when I'm like on the cushion or whatever, so to speak. And
Mhm.
then I had a teacher and a mentor who said to me that no, Steph, your meditation practice is everything you do off the cushion. And
Mhm.
it made me realize that I thought, oh, here I was like being all, mindful and calm and compassionate while I'm sitting on this. And then I get off and I go back to my real life. But in reality, my real life is everything I'm doing when I'm navigating the world, connecting with people, showing up for them, and all that. And
Mm.
so you're already doing all this stuff. You're already showing up to work. You already have friends. You already have a family. You already have a community. So, where can you behave differently in a way that's more nourishing and fulfilling for you and for them? It's like looking for those opportunities for intersection in the things that you're already doing. So, if adding something on feels too much, simply trying to transform your existing interactions into ones of love and care and
Mm.
consideration will go so, so, so far.
Yeah, oh my gosh, and I think sometimes there's even just, like, a mindset shift on
Mm,
some of the things
yeah.
that we are doing, and, you know, recognizing when I work on this podcast and, you know, put it out there, I'm not typically thinking about that in service of others because
Mm,
it's like, "Well, this is something I wanted to do with my life and my time, and I'm just gonna see how it goes," um and really, when I kind of shift that around and think about, like, how can I
mm,
get this information out to people, I'm making it because I think there's something valuable there, and, um, man, that's really energizing to think
yeah.
about it that way, and yeah, like, I'm sure there's so many people out there that are already, doing so much, moving through the world as
Yeah,
kind and compassionate people, where it's like, you know, even just letting someone if have a spot in the parking lot, if you're both
exactly.
kinda at it at the same time, that
Yeah,
is something where shifting that mentality and recognizing that it is that you already are doing some of this, and then also like, "Wow, these are little micro moments. Where can I add a little more? Where can I sprinkle some extra in?" Like, and how good does that make me feel when I'm
exactly.
sprinkling all of this in?
Exactly, like, to me, I hear you say that, and it's like, these little moments of love that we can just cultivate in our days, like, we all know that's what matters most, right? Like, we all know deep down everything else is ultimately just a distraction that we've made up. All of this hustling, all of this work, all of this pressure that we put on ourselves, all of this
Mhm.
social media and internet stuff, it all pales in comparison, and it's those little moments of helping each other that are literally what makes life worth living. And when we die, and when people stand up at our funerals, they're not going to talk about how much money we made. They're not going to talk about how many nights we put in late at the office. They're going to talk about the moments where we showed up for them and what it said about who we were as people. And
Mm,
those moments, that the fact that that's what we celebrate at the end of somebody's life, this momentous experience, shows us that we all know what matters most. It's
mm,
really about kind of reminding ourselves of that on a regular basis so we stop forgetting and we stop getting distracted and pulled away by these other forces, and
mhm,
instead come back to the moment and go like, here I am, here's a beautiful person in front of me, like how
mhm,
can I be there for them and let them know that they're loved and cared for and that they matter. And then as I do, I get to experience like the helper's high that goes along with that, and
mm,
knowing that I'm being useful and making something of my own life. What could be more fulfilling than that?
mhm. Yeah, 1,000%. One of my favorite things about your book is that you, love sharing stories, and you share many stories throughout that book, and I had listened to it, at a time when I was going through my own personal hardship, and it was really a challenging time, and your stories and the things that you shared were just so moving and so hopeful and beautiful, and, um, yeah, I kind of want to give an opportunity if there is a story that you would like to share, something that you kind of would like to leave with listeners. I
Mm.
can think of a few favorites from the book, but they can read
No,
those.
I wanna hear your favorites. Tell me,
Okay. I will actually, I'm glad you give me the opportunity because I have told so many people these stories, but and I'm like, they make me emotional every time. But there's two. One was about the grandma benches that were created because, and I'll give everybody just a little bit of like a background and hopefully I don't get the details wrong, but basically there was just like a need for support for people going through crisis challenges, like um, needing help. And then there's all these grandmas that want purpose and something to do and a way to spend their time. And it was kind of like the need was there and the solution was already just right there. And some guy organized to make, you probably remember his name, but he organized to make these benches where grandmothers would sit on them for people to come and talk about what they were going through. And that was amazing to me because I was like, "Oh my gosh, how what a simple, beautiful solution of just really identifying um, these things that were already in place, just needed like to be formalized."
Totally.
But the other one that I'll share briefly because it just is insane to me about this cascade effect.
Mm.
It was about the this man, I think in the UK,
Mm.
that watched the documentary with his wife about um, domestic abuse survivors, and this woman that had survived her own domestic abuse relationship and left created a organization for other women, and then that documentary was created. And then this man who worked at what, like the transportation center,
Mhm.
watched the documentary with his wife and like turned to his wife, right, and was like, I'm going to do something about this, and ended up providing, making a way for the company he was at to provide free untraceable rides to people in domestic abuse situations to be able to leave, because that's the big thing, is it's how do you leave, how do you have the money, how can you get away without being found. And then apparently it went on and it was expanded. And now I think domestic abuse survivors can get almost anywhere
Yeah.
in the UK.
Yeah.
That story is so amazing to me because it's grand and it changes lives, it saves lives. Like it really, I told you it makes me emotional
No,
every
it makes
time.
me wanna cry too.
And it's like, it's huge. And it also came from like all of these subsequent moments of people just being brave, of people
Yeah.
like using their gifts, speaking out. Like that woman leaving, the fact that it started there, one woman leaving a bad situation for herself, for her
Yeah.
well being, for what she needed. There was no conception of an idea where that would go.
Yeah.
And I think that's so much of what you share. And what we've been talking about in this episode is like what we think is small is really not small.
It's not. And when I talked to Darren, the man who you're talking about, like, he was so humble, and he he described it as like I had it was he was like I had no choice. It was something I had to do. I had to try my best to do something. And the fact that he spent like a year of his life trying to get his company to do that and putting the infrastructure in, and then like advocating for it with all the other railway companies so that they implemented it, and then they started taking it to the ferries so that people in remote islands in the UK could escape off the islands. And as you said, now any domestic violence survivor or person who's escaping a situation can safely leave on public transport anywhere in the UK. And the woman who left her husband, her abusive husband initially, as you said, imagine going back to her and saying, this act of courage, this profound act of courage would have been enough in and of itself. You just leaving to protect your own well being is brave enough. God, it's so brave, obviously. But did you know that in 20 years, the ripple effects of your actions are going to make it so that anyone fleeing domestic abuse will be able to do so safely? That's what we'll never be able to see. We're never going to be able to trace those ripple effects. And that's why that story touched me so much, because it made me realize what is happening that we never ever get to look at. We never get to notice it, but there are stories like that are happening every minute of every day, and we
Mhm.
have to trust that they're happening and just trust that we're playing our role and that things will unfold in such a beautiful way as long as we show up in the present moment.
Mm. It's so beautiful.
It's one of my favorite stories too. I couldn't believe it when I read about it. It was just so incredible. And again, like what an amazing way to take advantage of what's in your control and, leverage your environment to do something where you can and not stress. Like again, Darren didn't say I can't save everybody, so I'm not going to save anyone.
Mm.
he
Mhm.
didn't he didn't say I can't solve domestic violence, so I'm not going to do anything. He said there's a problem in that domestic violence survivors can't get away. And I work at a transportation company. So what can I do? And I just
Mm.
think if we can follow that example, anything is possible in our world.
What an amazing note to end it on. I am so grateful to have had you here. This has just been so powerful for me. So I'm grateful in and of that. And I also can't wait to get this podcast out there and have people listen. And I would love to hear what anyone thinks that's listening. If you have things that you want to share, I also, Stephanie is so kind, and we are going to be doing a giveaway of a
Yeah.
signed copy of the new Happy, which is so amazing, guys. This book is like incredible. Definitely one to read, I think, over and over again. And so that'll be fun. If you want to find out more about that, it'll be on my Instagram. And yeah, Stephanie, where can people find you?
Everything at the newhappy.com, and you can find me on social media at Stephanie Hson. But thank you, Hayden. It's been such a joy. I'm so grateful for you, and like I feel so privileged getting to witness you and your gifts. You're such a beautiful and amazing person, and I feel so lucky to know you and thankful to you for all that you do. You inspire me, and I'm just really grateful to know you.
Oh, thank you so much. That means the world to me. I really appreciate that. All right. You guys tune in next time. I hope you loved it. Share it, and I'll see you guys. Bye.